Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Adoption. I'm Kim.
And I'm Heather. And today's episode is really kind of a heart-to-heart conversation for married couples who are navigating infertility, loss, or maybe even the waiting that comes before adoption. If you feel called to parenthood, but obstacles feel like they keep getting in the way, this conversation is for you.
And we want to recognize that this path that you are on may feel extremely emotional and it may often feel lonely, but you don't have to walk it alone. And your marriage can actually grow stronger in this season when you approach it with intention and faith.
And I want to say something, Kimberly, before we get started here. And it's something we were talking about before. Some couples are coming into this journey, the journey to try to achieve parenthood, that maybe they haven't been married that long. And by that long, I mean 4, 5, 6 years. You don't have the same experience that, couples who've been married 20, 25 years may have. You're learning together, you're growing together still as a couple. So, I just want to recognize that even if you have been together a little longer, sometimes this is the first rough patch that or loss or challenge the couples have had in their marriage. So, you know, don't feel like, you like what you said, you're not alone. This is not out of the ordinary. Whenever we encounter things in our marriage that are not smooth sailing, it can be natural to struggle with how are we dealing with this? How are we dealing with this together? And this is one of those things that actually will to grow your relationship, to make it deeper, and to start forming patterns that, like it or not, they're going to help in the future when you encounter other losses or other challenges together. So if this is your first challenge that you face together, it can actually make your relationship stronger, richer, and more resilient when you have other losses in your lives in the future. So, you know, let's start with something that's really important, and that is a diagnosis of infertility and, that loss, whether you've had a pregnancy loss or just a loss of the expectation that you would be pregnant and have a baby. Those are both events that will trigger grief, and that may be invisible to others. It may be invisible to you, but that grief is very real.
hmm And something that has helped me, something I heard helped me in a season where I was grieving. And the saying is that grief is unrequited love. So if you
Mm.
sit with that for a moment, it helps you understand how those feelings are so strong. And it's the love that it seems like that love that you have doesn't have anywhere to go and it becomes grief.
Mhm.
And unspoken grief can create distance in a marriage. Romans 12:15 says, "Mourn with those who mourn." And that's true in marriage too. You may grieve differently. One spouse may want to talk, the other may need space, and that's okay. The key is giving each other grace.
And I think I'd add to that, one spouse may not even understand that the other is feeling grief. I've worked with adoptive couples prior to starting on adoption where the husband was really struggling to move to adoption because he was so set on continuing in his words, his bloodline, his family. He was the last male carrying this name. Those were things important to him that he was grieving, and his wife was like, I don't even understand. We'll have a child. He or she will have the last name. We'll go on. Just didn't understand that his grief was of that biological child. And it's, it's really hard to tell someone you shouldn't grieve a certain thing when grief is also so very personal. Loss of expectation is so very personal. And so, I love what you said, Kim. The key is giving each other grace, even if that grace relates to, I don't understand what you're feeling or why you're feeling this, but I'm going to give you grace and you know, be there with you through it. And I think that's actually one of the hardest parts of infertility, um, and moving to adoption is that, you know, each spouse often experiences that grief differently. One may feel, so we see this in men, especially responsible. If it's male factor infertility, they may feel responsible for the fact that their wife won't experience pregnancy. For women, we often see such frustration and sorrow over the fact that she feels that, everyone else's body works normal. Mine sure seems like it should work normal, and it just doesn't. Why? It's not fair. It's not right. Um, or they may feel and experience something totally different. When it comes to moving to adoption, one may feel ready to move forward right away. The other may need time to process. Um, that's where we see and often encourage, exploring to see if therapy might be needed to provide not just a safe space for both of you to work through those things, but also to get some tools on how to move forward a different path toward adoption, and understand that it is separate. It's not a continuation of the biological pregnancy. Adoption is a new journey. It's a fresh start. And how can we be equipped to move into there, and at the same time healing from the feelings and losses that may come with that infertility or pregnancy loss. And that therapy, often it gives us the opportunity to really talk about those things too, without pressure, without judgment, and without feeling like maybe one spouse needs to, be strong for the other one.
And therapists, especially when they have someone that they're helping through a situation, right? It's a situational need that's bringing this client to them or patient to them, that they specialize in guiding people through those feelings of that moment when the expectation isn't coming to fruition. And I think overall, that's just something therapists really are good at, guiding people through. And by tapping into some resources, and your company may offer, check into
Hmm.
those benefits. Sometimes people are surprised to find out that their benefits include a session or two with a therapist for something such as this, a very unique situation that is a season you're moving through. And by
Right.
taking care of your own emotional health, you can also bring strength into your marriage. So this therapy might be together or it might be individual. But instead of bottling up emotions or carrying silent frustrations, therapy gives you those tools to communicate better and understand each other's perspectives and remain united as a couple.
Hmm. Absolutely. I know you were talking about employee benefits, just a little addition there. I know there are many um, EAP programs, is what they're called, employee assistance programs. Many
I
of
was
them
going to
now
say,
have
I don't understand HR.
many of them have a counseling benefit that actually is 6 sessions, which is wonderful, and it can really be the time you need to talk through and really get the tools to help. Um, it also can help you prepare for the adoption, because when it comes to adoption, there are also unknowns. There are waiting periods, uncertainty about matches, decisions that have to be made about the path to adoption, fear of what the future may hold, both for your adoption journey and for adoptive parenting. Therapy can really help you build resilience if that's a challenge for you, so that instead of letting fear drive your decisions or stop you in your tracks, you can approach the road to adoption with clarity, with hope, with peace, and with confidence.
If adoption is on your heart, whether you're thinking about adopting or considering placing a baby, lifetimeadoption.com is a great place to begin. You'll find real life stories, answers to common questions, and resources that meet you right where you are. Most of all, you'll find a team that's compassionate, experienced, and ready to help you take the next step when you're ready. That's lifetimeadoption.com.
So, I think also this is really where intentional communication will help as well. And I know we talked about that recently in an episode about how important communication is in adoption with everyone, but certainly in your marriage. You know, we all have different communication styles and levels, and in a marriage it is certainly unique. I think most every marriage is different from the next. And one thing that's good to do, I'll say especially as a wife, is don't assume you know how your spouse is processing, and don't assume that he or she knows how you are processing. Don't be afraid to share openly your concerns, your hopes, your questions, and don't be afraid to ask theirs. You know, um, and if you get answers like, "Well, I don't know. Well, I didn't know that." These are great opportunities for knowing that, you know what, we need to learn more about this, or we need to talk more about this, or maybe together we need to call an adoption professional and have some of these things answered. Um, because it's really important, again, not just to process where you've been with the losses, but also process where you're going. Because when you start on adoption, there's a lot of decisions to make. And that's why communication is so important, because your knowledge, your learning, those are things that are going to really go into the decisions you make as you embark on adoption.
And one practice that you can put into effect or implement is having a weekly adoption date night. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a time set aside to check in. This might be something that you do at home, or you might go somewhere else. Maybe you go for a walk and talk. It doesn't have to be out at a restaurant. I mean, when you go out to a restaurant, maybe you just want to let your hair down and relax and, enjoy just being yourselves. But, create a moment intentionally where you've set aside time to check in, and that you both know that this is what this time is for. So you can ask each other things like, what's been the hardest part for you this week? Or where are you feeling hopeful? Or how can I support you better right now? And we find that, you know, let me backtrack. With marriage, it's a there's a concept that marriage isn't 50-50, right? Marriage can sometimes be he's doing 70, she's doing 30, and sometimes it flip-flops. And by asking these questions, it's a good way to understand whether you need to be giving the 70 because your spouse is really only at a 30 right now. And we find that spouses and married couples who are moving through this together, they often do flip flop. When the other one's feeling low, the other spouse is there to pick them up. Sometimes they're both feeling low at the same time, but you know what? You're walking through it together. And remember, too, even in those low moments where you both maybe don't feel like you have the strength to lift each other up, this too shall pass, right? That's just
Mhm.
something to remember that these feelings that can sometimes weigh us down, they will pass. But being really intentional about checking in and both understanding that that is what this moment is set aside for, that tonight after dinner when we go for our walk, that's what we're going to be talking about. Um, I think that that really helps you understand and kind of gauge that temperature with each other as to how the spouse is feeling or um, a moment that maybe they had a thought that was something they didn't get a chance to talk to you about, something that was a milestone for them and how the Lord is shifting their feelings and heart about adoption. That it's nice to have those moments where you can uh, create that situation for these conversations to happen.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I love in Ephesians 4, the Apostle Paul says, "Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love." And that's what these conversations really are about. You know, knowing that we all process things differently, but we want to have the opportunity to talk about them and be patient and gentle with each other, even if they're things we've talked about 100 times, but we need to talk about them one more just to get through them. Um, it just really is a reflection that this can be a tough time, and the more we can have things out in the open and get the help and support we need, the easier we can walk through them to the blessings on the other side.
And even if you don't agree with or like what your spouse is saying or is feeling or where they're at with things, be ready and intentional about that acceptance. It is
Hmm.
how they're feeling, it is where they are. Accept where they are and understand that that's not necessarily a reflection of where you are. And they may be moving through things just at a different pace.
Hmm.
And how they feel and the comments they make today might not be the same a week from now.
Hmm.
The Holy Spirit works on people.
Hmm.
If you invite the Holy Spirit into your marriage and if that is the way you move in the world, I've had so many families share that through prayer, the Holy Spirit has grown their heart for adoption and helped them move through that unrequited love that they feel after experiencing infertility and loss. But
Hmm.
be prepared to have that acceptance. I think in marriage that is one of the most attractive qualities in a spouse is you say how you feel and your spouse accepts you.
Absolutely.
And once you face the grief of infertility, many couples find themselves asking, well, what's next? And for some, the answer is adoption.
And I think it's good to know and understand that, you know, it can seem real easy to say, Kim, oh, what's next? Let's do adoption. And absolutely that shift, I think, brings its own questions. And so starting keeping that communication open to really help navigate the transition from one to another is really helpful. Talking about things, what excites you the most about adoption? What scares you the most about adoption? You know, Talking about how we see adoption as part of God's plan for our family. And really drilling down to the practicalities. What kind of openness are we comfortable? Or do we know enough to make those decisions? Do we need to learn more? What are we open in regards to our adoption preferences for a child? Starting to have those conversations really will start uh, preparing you from a practical standpoint, but also preparing your heart to move forward.
hmm So, having these conversations, and again, I can't say enough, intentional. Be intentional. That intentionality helps you get on the same page as a couple so that when you do begin the adoption process, you are united in vision and in heart. And as a side note, I will say be patient with the process.
Hmm. Hmm. And, I think it's good to maybe have a little moment of honesty here. We don't always see eye to eye on how we talk to each other. One spouse may want to process everything out loud while the other needs to be quiet or thinks about it before they talk or researches and reads about it before they talk.
hmm Exactly. And sometimes those differences can feel like conflict when it's really
Mm.
just two unique styles of communication clashing.
Mhm.
One spouse might want to fix things right away while the other spouse needs some time to mull it over and think it through and is a little more methodical about things.
Absolutely. And I totally get that. In my house, I'm often the one who is going fast and has already done the research and learns everything about it. And my husband is a little different. And sometimes it felt like, is are we in the same place? But he's also more quiet about those things. And I'm the talk it through person after I've done all the research. And I think that for us, and again, I've been married over 25 years, we've learned to work together to respect each other's rhythms and styles. And we've also been through a lot of growth and loss. And that's why I talked at the beginning that, most couples embarking on this journey don't have that 25-year together building of how we handle tough stuff. So it's good to know and hear and learn about these when we're at that a little earlier in our relationship and going through things that we probably didn't plan for prior to marriage.
hmm And I think one of the things that sometimes, well, I'll just say in my experience working with couples, as I sit down with them and we're on a call together, the husband and the wife, and she's open to everything. I'm asking, hey, are you open to this? Are you open to that in your adoption preferences? And the husband is, you can see the thoughts turning in his mind. He's looking, he's thinking, he's looking into the distance because he's thinking. And you can tell on his face he's weighing pros and cons. Often, what I find he's doing is weighing the risk because he's
Mm,
taking ownership of his role as the protector of the family and the protector of his wife's peace and happiness. And so understanding that sometimes that's where your husband might lag a little behind because he's weighing that risk to the family and to you and other children you might be parenting. So respect differences and never assume your spouse is shutting you out or assume that she's or he's being too pushy, but pause and ask, what does my spouse need in this moment to feel heard and recognize where their communication style may be coming from?
definitely. And realize it's not about one style being right or wrong. We're each made in God's image, but we're each made differently. And that balance, that variety, that really can strengthen our marriage. Um, provided we are able to lean into it with patience and grace and understanding that we come into this relationship united, but with our individual strengths and differences.
And this next thing I'm going to say, it's a muscle that has to be exercised. This next thing I'm going to say doesn't come naturally, just people typically just aren't born with this. But choosing gentleness, having patience, and giving space. Proverbs 15, verse 1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath." You want to start your day setting yourself up to be able to do this. This means getting really clear on how you're going to move in the world today before your spouse comes along and says something you don't like, and then you naturally react, right? You react,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not as gentle as you wanted to be because you weren't grounded in the first place. Um, so maybe spending some time in the morning in gratitude, spending some quiet time instead of wake up, feet on the ground, coffee in the cup, and we are running and we are in our get it done mode. And so when something happens with our spouse that we don't like, we can react instead of taking a moment to be patient and being the most patient with our spouse, being the most gentle with our spouse, especially in a time like this.
Right. And I think too, it's good to keep in mind that, sometimes, certainly I love what you said about gentleness, Kim, but also sometimes when we feel like we're stepping into a conversation or we're pulled into a conversation sooner than we're ready to talk about it. It's good to be able to say that. It's good to be able to say, you know what, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't processed all that yet. You know, but but keep that door open. And that's another opportunity for gentleness. Because I think it's great that, I mean, I know sometimes my husband might start talking about something and I'm like, whoa, whoa, we have to slow this down a little bit. I wasn't prepared to talk about this. So, but it's good to be able to be honest and open and share that I'm just not there yet. You're ahead of me, but I know where you're at. Let me catch up.
Hmm. And, marriage communication takes practice. You might not have had a ton of occasion to practice because this, like Heather said, might be your first time that you're encountering challenges together as a
Hmm.
newly married couple, perhaps. A lot of times these days, especially the couples that we work with in adoption, are a little bit older, 30s and
Hmm.
40s, and marriage is still new to them. Maybe they met later, they completed some other life goals first, and then finally found the partner God had for them and got married. So just recognize that in marriage, this specific communication style. It takes practice to get it right for each other. But once you start to see your differences as complementary instead of competing, it builds connection instead of division.
Hmm. And I think something we definitely want to emphasize is it's always important to keep your marriage first. Adoption will add joy, it will add challenge, but you need to provide a strong marriage as the foundation for your family, for your
Mhm.
children.
Ecclesiastes 4, verse 12 says, "A cord of three strands is not quickly broken." When you invite God into your marriage as that third strand, He gives you the strength to face loss, waiting, and the unknown together.
Hmm. And I think that may be foreign for some people. Some Christians especially, may we got married in a church. We go to church on Sunday, but you know it 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 may not be prioritizing things like praying together daily. And that's something that I certainly would challenge you to consider. But also, find the moments to laugh, keep dating each other. And definitely don't let adoption paperwork, don't let infertility treatments, if you're still there, don't let those things steal your joy as a couple. That's really important to, even in the midst of tough times, ensure that you're still finding the the joy that you have in each other.
And actually, that's something that brings a breath of fresh air to many couples as
Hmm.
they come into the world of adoption. that they're finally able to move forward after so many years of waiting for test results and so
Mm-hmm.
many different medications and the hormones and the
Mm-hmm.
way that affects, especially the wife. And
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't feel like herself. And so transitioning into adoption, they're both able to work on this together, and the pressure is off of both of them physically. And so many of them just share what a breath of fresh air it is. And that's part of what excites them about coming in to adoption. But
Mm-hmm.
faith and perspective are so important. When the waiting feels long, and sometimes the waiting feels like it started a decade ago when you were trying to find a spouse.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like the wait started the first moment you decided you wanted to have a baby. Um, and through those moments, you might wonder if God even sees you. But scripture reassures us. And this is what I love about the Bible, that it's so packed with promises. And I love knowing that those promises wouldn't have needed to be made if God thought we were never going to need it. Does that make sense? If the road was going to
Absolutely.
be so smooth, we wouldn't need any of that.
Right. Right.
um, but one of the best ones, scripture reassures us in Jeremiah 29:11. He has plans to give you hope and a future. And I encourage you to pick a verse, make it your phone screensaver, your phone wallpaper, put it on a post-it around the house, and just remind yourself of those promises. And for many couples, their infertility experience and their adoption experience is something that not only draws them closer to each other and makes their marriage stronger, but it draws them closer to the Lord because they are exercising that faith muscle now more than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that it's really good to ensure that, you know, we know that the future may not be what we expected. And that, we've talked a lot about grief today. That loss of expectation, you know, it's not what I expected. But God is still faithful. God makes what's the verse? Man sets his plan, God makes the way. And sometimes those changes of expectations is you know a part of submission to you know God's way, what God has for us. And in adoption or fertility, the waiting can be part of preparing our heart, or it can be the means of aligning our stories with the child God has for you.
Hmm.
So, I think, I'm a big believer in giving tools, giving practical ways that, people can leave with something to do. So, here's a few things I know we've talked about today. Um, One is pray together daily. If you're not in that place with your spouse, then see what you can do to find faith together today. If you need to find a church and have it find a church that you both enjoy, and do that every week. Start building that life of faith, home of faith that you want to provide for your child, you know. If you're a writer, think about journaling more, writing letters, to your future child. Journaling your journey with your future child in mind. That really can help keep you focused on hope. Celebrate. Celebrate the small successes. Have date nights. I love Kim. You said, when you go on walks, not if you go on walks, when you go on walks together. Um, Laugh together. Keep that joy in your marriage, even as you're going through tough things. And we didn't talk about it much today, but definitely be sure you have a support system, a positive support system. And that could be friends or family, could be church, it could be your adoption professionals that you're working with. You want to have people in your life who understand where you're at.
Mm-hmm. And can I just add one tip that kind of will be a vehicle as well? That gratitude I mentioned, starting your
Mm-hmm.
day with that
Mm-hmm.
is, and now they're even researching what an impact gratitude makes on your brain scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
God is amazing in how he created us. And that's a whole other topic. But if you can, and something that if you've been on the internet and social media, they talk about stacking your habits.
Mm-hmm.
Stack your
Mm-hmm.
gratitude habit. For me, when I go
Definitely.
into the steam room, I decided, I'm like, this isn't just going to be the chance for me to make myself an idol and make my body feel optimized and everything. This is going to be like this is going to sound so corny, Heather, but I'm going to share it anyway. My den of gratitude. So
Aw, I love that.
right? The only thing I get to do in there is thank God for things. It's
That's
not my
great.
moment to ask for things. It's my moment to thank God for things. Now, you might say, well, I'm okay with whether I am thankful or asking. And your prayers, can evolve over time as well. But stack those habits, right? Something you're already doing,
Mm-hmm.
transform that into the moment where you're really intentional, maybe about your prayer life. And don't stop dreaming together with your spouse. Remember your why. Talk about the family values you want to pass down or the traditions you hope to create. Coming into adoption doesn't mean you give any of that up.
Yeah,
These conversations just help you keep looking forward instead of only focusing on the obstacles.
definitely. And, you know, I know we've said it, but I'm going to say it again. Infertility, loss, uncertainty, unmet expectations, these are all painful things. But, you know, we want to be resilient. We don't want them to tear our relationships apart. And how we avoid that is through open conversation, intentional connection, faith in God's timing, you know, seeking the resources we talked about today, like therapy. You know,
Hmm.
this season can bring you closer together and build the type of strength in your marriage that that makes it so much stronger, richer, and deeper.
Hmm. And in case anyone hasn't told you lately, God hasn't forgotten you. He knows you're longing for a child, and He cares just as deeply about your marriage. Trust Him with both.
So, wow, Kim, that was kind of deep today.
Hmm.
So I want to thank you for joining us today on Let's Talk Adoption. If this episode encouraged you, maybe share it with someone else who might need hope in their journey. If you have any feedback from us, we'd love to hear from you at letstalkadoption.com.
We'll see you next time, and remember, trust the author of your story. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.